Venus Virus, that was great because it was getting the sort of old team back together again as well, that we did the show back in 2007 when most of your students would have been nippers. But it was a great opportunity to go for something in this mad setup that we've got now and filming in the bedroom. And I've always been interested in filming, you know, working with the iPad it is really now. I used to do a lot of Super 8 stuff.
You've always, for the beginning of your career then, you've always been filming yourself, projecting, using, layering up the stuff that you've been doing. You've always been really hands-on.
Aye, totally. While at the same time, it was just because, like, with some of the questions you asked and that about, you know, about film and telly stuff, I mean, I do find so much of it still a real mystery to me, especially film. It's like, because you have to sort of focus your sort of attention as the actor onto this camera, that you're playing to that, but then also imagine it then gone out the other way around and being projected big. It still baffles me in so many ways, because when I was at college, way back 1977 to 1980, when I did 3 years training to be an actor, it was all theatre. There was no emphasis. They didn't have any equipment to allow us to work on, sort of think in terms of telly, and certainly no on film. And just suddenly you're out there trying to do it. And one of the early jobs I got was on Local Hero. I was really lucky like that to get a part in that. And that was fine because there was a whole sort of group of us. We were a bit like, they're like a sort of theatrical sort of company. They are working on that, and it was on location and all that sort of thing. But then to just sort of try and understand what's being asked of you, and especially it seems when you've got a face like mine, which far too expressive, you know, it's like that some people have just got a natural ability to stay placid in their face, and as well, and invite the audience to come in and make up its own mind, whereas I'm
So would you say that's the difference between performing for stage and performing for camera then? Is that?
Yeah. I mean, it is. It's sort of, it's all in the eyes, especially. You've got to be willing to express it and have the ability to be able to just not try too hard, just pull it all back and let the eyes do the work.
You mentioned Local Hero, and that was one of the films I wanted to speak about because that was the first time I ever seen you on film. And that was filmed out in location. And was it Penance or Penance? What was the name of the kind of that amazing little village?
Yeah, Pennon on the East Coast, where it's like such a slope, didn't it? The gradient, getting all this equipment up and down was a huge task in itself, but it was sort of isolated then. You just had this little strip of houses that we were filming on. The actual village, the actual beach that they shot was on the West Coast, Morar Sands. It's an absolutely beautiful beach. But I only appeared on the beach once. And I never got to meet Burt Lancaster. He did all his filming really by that. They did actually do some. They made an interior at his office in Fort William, but I was never involved in that side of things. But Pennon, yeah, it was great. If you ever see the film again, that up on the cliff, up on the right hand side, there's 2 wee cottages up there, and I shared one of them with Johnny Watson. So it was a lovely job.
So Local Heroes become like a Scottish cult classic. We did a programme last year where we showed all Scottish films, and that was one that was on our programme list. So most of the students for last year will have seen it. But I was just looking through, there's so many films that you've worked on, like from like War Horse with Spielberg. But one of the ones that I felt as if had become quite a cult classic, and when I was growing up, was Acid House. Could you tell us a wee bit about working on that?
Yeah. Well, that was a great job because Paul McGuigan, that directed that, he understood Irvin's work, and Irvin wrote the screenplay for that, because I'd got to know him through a theatre job originally called Head State, and then I started doing his audiobooks, the Irvin Welsh books on the audiobook versions. I've done 10 of them now, but I'd always felt it was like with Train Spotting and that they were never quite as good and never quite capturing what the books had, whereas the Acid House trilogy really did, because it was from him. So it was one of the first jobs I had where I was then speaking in my own accent and all that sort of thing. And yeah, so that was a lovely one today. And it's one that you notice over the years, you know, people remember you for this, that, and the other. Usually no theatre stuff, because people don't know that many people see theatre, but people have seen the Acid House. It's amazing how many people have actually that. And it definitely is a cult classic in that way. Yeah.
Just for those who are not aware of it, from memory, it's a trilogy of 3 short films, but they come as a package. It's like a triptych. So Paul McGuigan, just to say, he's a Belsill guy as well. He's for Belsill as well. He's done a couple other really good films. I like Gangster Number 1, and recently he did a really good film called Film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool. So if anybody wants to look into him. But you mentioned just recently, just there, so you've had this relationship with Irvin Welsh's work through, was it Soft Touch was the one that you were in? Was that the name of it? Out of the 3 films, was it Soft Touch? About a guy who kind of gets bullied by the neighbours upstairs, and everybody just takes the total mickey out of him. So have a watch of that, everybody. But you mentioned briefly, was it Headspace? What was the name of the theatre you did? Head State?
Head State, yeah. It was a show of this company, Boiler House, that doesn't exist anymore. But it was the idea of it was that we were going to make a piece of Acid House theatre. And it was a devised show that Irvin was the writer on. And it was just that Train Spotting had come out, and Acid House, as the book, was just about to come. And he was just about to move to Amsterdam as well. So it was all in flux a bit, but it was also the discovery for me of Acid House. That where I lived in London in the late 80s, I could see what was going on. It was in Shoreditch beside Old Street, and I could see all these people, especially like on a Sunday morning, all just sort of, it was this snooker club where they were having nights in there, and then people just tumbling out of there. And I was quite baffled by it. And I could see at Old Street Station, all these people would gather like on a Saturday night, and then somebody would get a phone call on the public phone there. And then boom, they'd all disappear. And I God, something's happening here, as Bob Dylan says, but I don't know what it is. And then I was really involved in politics, especially the early 90s. I was doing work at the same time, and we did Brotherly Love, but I'd moved up to Dundee because of the Timex strike. I'd been really involved in this big strike that was going on. And then I got asked to do the show Head State, and Irvin Welsh then took me clubbing, and that just opened up a whole new world to me as well. And I think that's how we met, really, in that way, Kim, as well, because I did then find that I wanted to perform within that world. Yeah. I loved going clubbing, I loved it, but I also then wanted to then make work within that, and I started performing in clubs. And one of the greatest ones I've ever done was at the Archies. There was a book came out called Disco Biscuits, and it was all about clubbing, short stories. And I took little bits of all the stories. Funnily enough, apart from the story that was by Irvin Welsh, I couldn't find a sort of bit in that to fit this theme that I had of then making a performance that started at dusk and finished at dawn. So it went through the whole night experience. And I pieced all these bits together, and then I don't know, probably before your time, most of you probably, there was a guy called Max Headroom that used to be, it was like a sort of head inside a TV. It was an animation sort of thing. And but I got the idea of me being in a box, because I thought at a club, everybody's standing, they can't really see your body. So I thought, it's just, all they're going to be able to see is my head. So I got a massive big TV monitor and got this rigged up that I could be in front of it. And then it was like perspex, but sort of mirrored perspex that was behind me. And my pal Angeline Ferguson, who, like Kim's done loads of visuals at clubs and all that as well, she did an animation to go behind it. And then I was mic'd up and I had a soundtrack. I had loads of Basement Jacks, especially. It was this DJ pal that I met through Irvin. She made the soundtrack. And I would perform. And I was doing it. I did it at the Ministry of Sound and the Club The End and Back to Basics. But at the Arches, it was the launch of the book. And it was like, I could tell that this audience were coming up as I'm talking about coming up at a club, and it was just absolute joy to perform this. And unfortunately, the attempt to film it didn't work that night because condensation, the camera got all steamed up. And,
the sweat.
But it was a one-off gig, and it was just glorious. Yeah.
I'm just going to pause you there, Tam. Can everybody make sure their mics are off, please? Just because we're getting a wee bit of background noise and we're recording this. That leads me on then to kind of my next question, which is one of the questions that came through the students when I was giving a presentation about my work, is where do your ideas come from? And especially a lot of your ideas are like you use your platform about to kind of voice for activism and stuff like that. So and it's really a difficult question to answer.
No, it's not. And I'm actually just going to jump back because I never answered the previous question about brotherly love.
All right, okay.
I do just want to say just a little bit on that, because then that was back at this point when I was living up in Dundee. And then this guy, Angus Reid, that I'd done a show with, they had, it started up called the Scottish Film School that was part of Napier University in Edinburgh. And I don't think it lasted very many years, but he was in the first year of it and they got the chance to make a film. So he then, normally people would be making a short film and, you know, it was sort of reasonable to do it within that. But he decided, no, he was going to go for a movie and that he was going to shoot it on 16mm and it was going to be black and white. And it was going to be two brothers, like the situation he'd had, two brothers called Tam and Russell, played by myself and my wee brother Russell, who's a musician but had never acted before. And it was driving a ladder from Edinburgh right up to this ladder on the top of Scotland. A ladder was an old Russian car. And that I was going to be driving my wee brother, and the driving, that travel was going to be a form of therapy. That Russell was playing a character, it wasn't quite himself, based on him, but that was having trouble drugs-wise, especially. And so that this drive up to Skerra was going to sort him out, but it was going to be sorting him out in the hard way. I was going to be slapping
no. I feel sorry for Russell in the first couple of scenes in the car. He's just getting slapped
right
about.
If you watch it, he does get such a slapping. And but I couldn't drive. And so there was 30 grand to make the whole film. But they could afford to get me 3 driving lessons. So I got 3 driving lessons while I was living in Dundee. And then we set off. And so I had no license, insurance, and I didn't even have my contact lenses and that as well. So I had to go up. And if you watch it, you'll see, oh, these cars are really overtaking us because we are going so slow, really. But it was up the A9, it was a dual carriageway, so there was nothing going to be coming at me. So we got away with it, and I did nearly all the driving in it. But it's something I'm really proud of, that film as well, because I think it was an amazing piece of work given the limitations that were on us, and we got it shown. It got shown on there used to be a short film sort of festival type of thing, almost on Channel 4, called the Shooting Gallery. It was great. Loads of stuff was on that, and it got shown on that twice, and it won the audience award at the Rotterdam Film Festival. And that,
Brilliant.
it was a lovely job, and I'm glad, you know, that's there for folk to see.
Aye, so everybody, I've shared that with you on Teams. You can all watch that film right now. It's called Brotherly Love, and it's about 50 minutes long, the duration. So you can all jump on and watch that and send Tam a message, because it's on his Vimeo channel, so you can give feedback. But that was, when was that film? 94 or 95 or something like that?
Yeah, sort of 93, yeah, around about that, 93, 94, I think, yeah. And
film.
Yeah, and then we finished it. We drove back down again, and they dropped me off at the picket line in Dundee. And so that had been a whole sort of chunk of my life there. And then suddenly I got this job, like I say, with Head State, and that opened up a whole new, sort of revolution for me. Moondog, so Brad has said there just now, that was a lovely job as well. Phil Johns, I met him through Irvin. He directed one of Irvin Welsh's called Wedding Bells, which again Irvin wrote the screenplay for with a guy called Dean Kavanagh. And Wedding Bells is a brilliant piece of work as well. That I've got a great scene in a graveyard where it's Shona, the lead actress, in that she's trying to pay me, and I'm going, no, I'm not wanting any money for it. And she says, take the money. She says, I'm just going to spend it on crack. And I say something like, well, at least you're not going to waste it. But to answer your second question about where the ideas come from, it's funny you saying that, because I often think of myself that, like, because you introduced me saying like an artist, but in many ways, I think in sort of similar ways to you, Kim, I think you are definitely an artist, but at the same time, you often have to work for other people. You have to find your art within their work. Right. And I've often felt like that, rather than sort of a battle now with sort of trying to make my own work and find my own way into things and do my own writing and all this. And it's an ongoing thing for me now. Mm-hmm. But I'll often find other people's work as the inspiration of that as well. And I thought about it this morning. It come back to me because I'm in a band. We're called the Bum Clocks, and we're my wee brother Russell, and we specialise in taking Robert Burns and putting Robert Burns with people like Iggy Pop and all sorts. We've done, and we've been going for years now. And often it come down to that we only then started to play Burns night. We'd get gigs in the end of January, and that would be it really. But we've managed to sustain it and keep it going, and it's a side of things that I really, really love. And last year we came out on an album that's called Stranger Things Can Happen, by a sort of amalgam in Edinburgh called Out of the Ordinary, that Irvin writes the sleeve notes for, and we've got a track on that called Climb the Lion, and we're up for this Scottish Album of the Year awards, but it's on vinyl. It's in the kitchen, and Emma's on a Zoom meeting through there. I can't go. I'm so chuffed with this that I am at my age, 61-year-old, and I reach finally, I'm on vinyl. So there's always hope, but the whole sort of basis of the Bum Clocks, and Bum Clocks is a word that never gets used nowadays. It means a flying summer beetle. It's a Scottish term for these sort of no a bee. It was something, some sort of big bees, that big flappy, like a blue bottle or something, maybe, or something. But it's in the last verse of Burns's first published poem, The Twa Dugs. And the bum clocks hummed in lazy drone or something it goes. But that poem, The Twa Dugs, I got the idea that what Rabbie was talking about in that was his relationship with Iggy Pop. That because Iggy Pop was always, he would wear a dog collar and he had songs called I Want to Be Your Dog, and that's well, so it just seemed to make sense to me that what he was talking about was his relationship. And because of that idea, that one wee daft idea, really, the whole thing is sort of carried on and spun off. And then I thought, you thought of that idea, Tam. It's like, it's really simple in a way, but it's really daft, but it's sort of, it's a good idea. It definitely has been.
And I see that in your work quite a lot, where you take these elements and you bring them together. Like, for example, Year of the Horse. That was a fantastic performance. That was performed in theatres. Artist Harry Horse, the illustrator, he's a political illustrator, is that correct? And there was loads of his illustrations all through your performance, but you can explain it better. So that was an idea of yours.
Yeah, well, he used to be the cartoonist in the Sunday Herald, and it was a period where I was living in London most of the time, and so the Sunday Herald didn't appear in there. It was only occasionally I'd be coming up here, and then I'd see, and they'd be in the middle pages of the Sunday Herald. There were cartoons, but there were paintings, drawings that had a column at the side of it that he had written text to go along with it. And I just thought these things were amazing pieces of work. And I was on the train to London one time. I was going down, and my mate, he did a show on, there's a wonderful radio station, an art radio station called Resonance FM, which is online, you can get, and it's got an amazing amount of stuff, and I've done loads of stuff on it over the years. And Johnny Brown, my pal, who's in a fantastic band called Band of Holy Joy, he got in touch with me on the train and said, we've not got anything for the show this week. His show was called Mining for Gold. It used to be on a Friday lunchtime. And he says, have you got any ideas? And I said, well, I'll have to think about it, Johnny, and I'll get back to you. And I had some papers there was like a free copy of the Scotsman that you could get on the train. I got that, and then I opened it and I saw this picture of this woman on it, and it was Harry Horse, the cartoonist. It was his wife, Mandy. And she died and he died together in this very remote part of Shetland Isles. And I was gobsmacked that this had happened. And I thought, he deserves a tribute. I realised then how much he marked me. And I knew that he had also written children's books. One's called The Last Polar Bears, which also became a part of my life in many ways. But I said to Johnny, I can get some of these cartoons, I could do the text from them, and I could do something on The Last Polar Bears as well. And what I did on that was I got Alison Peebles, a great Scottish actress, that she literally phoned in her performance live. She did bits of The Last Polar Bears live on the show, and I did some of the verse that Harry had written. And he was in a band called Swamp Trash that were a brilliant band that only made a couple of albums. That then, when he left, they became Sugar Nifty. But we had 3 or 4 of these songs, and then we had the verse that I was doing, and we had Alison, and we made an hour-long show of it. And then his family, that I didn't know Harry Horse. He was around in Edinburgh about the same time as me. He was sort of mid-80s. His family go, who is this guy, Tam Dean Burn, that's suddenly doing a show? Because they're in the midst of grieving and everything like that. And so I then got to know his family, and it's sort of, the whole thing then became a big sort of ongoing adventure, because they had a really tough time, because they then said that it hadn't been a sort of lover's tryst that killed, that they were then putting across a Sunday Times came out with an article saying he'd murdered her and then killed himself. And so the family were then going through another whole process of grieving that was just horrible. And the only thing they had to hang on to that was positive in that way was what I was doing. And it had been a show that Andy Arnold at the Tron had asked me to do a very small part in. He says, look, there's a tiny little part in this play. He says, but if you do it, you could do something up the stairs in the Tron, whatever you fancy. And so I thought I could make a show out of his cartoons, and then discovered there was 52 cartoons that he did, because he was doing them right up to the week he died. So that fitted then 52, a year of the horse, I made it. And so I projected them big, and I just did the text from each of them in front of the screen with a soundtrack by Keith McIver, Twitch from Optimo, and it became a show.
I've put an image of this particular show up in Teams, because there's a fantastic image of you standing in the projection. So if you want to have a look at what that aesthetic was, but there's a couple of things I just wanted to touch on that we already slightly spoke about. You were talking about the way that you work and the way that I work, and I've always said that collaboration is key to the kind of work that I make. And I'd say, is that something that's important in your work? I mean, you're always working with someone, you're always, whether it's a director or whether it's other creatives when you're making your own theatre. What is a good collaboration to you? What does collaboration mean for you?
It does mean an awful lot. And you do find that there are some people that you just get on with, and that you feel like you're like minds, and certainly you're one of them, Ken, for me. It is really important to me. But I am like that. But then there's also a part of me that I am such a loner in a way as well, that I'm quite a shy person in loads of ways. It sort of takes quite a lot for me to then be sociable and all of that as well. And also I've not got this burning desire to be up on the stage or that sort of project myself. It has to be stuff that I think's important, or that I want to work on, or that as well. But we saw, that's why, like, going back to Venus, that was so important, that it was those people that we worked with then, that pulling that team back together again was very special to me. And yeah, I try to reach out for collaboration. I think it is. I mean, the whole nature of this business is like that. But it's then fire, and I'm feeling it in the back of my head just now that that's David Bowie up there, and he kept going back and working with same people all the time. He had a mate for school that went through the whole thing with him, and I think it is about that. It's, you find over the years, it's the people that you trust most, and that as well. But you also learn from working with people that you're asked to work with, or that as well.
You want to work on projects that interest you for a reason, that you feel that they've got a purpose and they're important and they need to be heard. So that's what I wanted to just touch on. It was a point that Alan made about your relationship to activism within your work. It's quite important to you.
It is, yeah. I mean, I don't know where the politics that, fire me came from. Well, I did come up with this. I did discover that these books that I loved when I was at primary school, it was called Jennings, and it was this sort of public schoolboy, and it was his adventures with his pal Derbyshire. And when I've looked back, I thought, what was I getting for that? What was it about these books? Because they weren't like I mean, things like the Famous Five and stuff, I just wasn't really very interested in that as well. But this guy that wrote those books, Anthony Buckridge, again, it was with Johnny Brown's radio show, Mining for Gold. We were looking for material for one of them. And I would get the newspapers of the day and I would sort of do cut-ups, jumping from one paper to another and stuff like this. And it was in the Financial Times. It was an obituary for Anthony Buckridge. And I thought, oh God, that's the guy that wrote Jennings. And then I read in this obituary, it said he was a lifelong socialist and he loved theatre. And he put these into his work. And I thought, that's where it must have come from. Was for him, for reading these books that, you know, I hadn't remembered at the time, but then seeing that, so maybe that's what then did fire me, because it's no sort of in my family or that. I mean, my cousin, Lynn Henderson, is head of the PCS union in Scotland. She's a political animal. But it is something that did fire me for a very early age. And I went on a visit to the Soviet Union, as was for Christmas 1983, New Year 1984. So it felt 1984, and I'm going to be in the Soviet Union. And this is like, you know, when it was still the Soviet Union. And that had a massive effect on me. I mean, it turned out it was great. I thought it was going to be all trade unionists on it. But there was a big posse for Liverpool, and it was Echo and the Bunnymen, the band. Two of the guys for Echo and the Bunnymen, Will Sargent, the guitarist, that as well. So we had a fantastic 10 days it was. And then the miners' strike had a big effect on me then as well. And yeah, again, the same sort of thing, that I would find the means to make work around politics. That as well. It is what's inspired me. And my latest foray into it is there's this thing called Scotsman Sessions. The Scotsman newspaper have been asking actors and musicians and that to record themselves, you know, in lockdown and make a piece of work that they would put up. So I've been really, this whole thing about fish farms has really got to me. I just think it's utterly barbaric. It's just a disgrace that this mythical creature, the wild Scottish salmon, that is, you know, it's on the Glasgow, you know, sort of crest and that as well, that about a salmon swallowing a ring. And I mean, and these creatures are so tied in with Scotland, and they've come back, you know, they come back thousands of miles a year to that. But what's going on in fish farms, and Scotland is riddled with them now up the west coast, is that then they have these cages in the water where they pack these salmon, but these salmon they're like Frankenstein creatures, really, fish. You know, they don't bear any relation to the wild salmon. It's a domesticated salmon, but it's happened so quickly that they are close enough to these salmon that when they escape, they will breed with them, and they're weakening. It's genocide going on of the Scottish wild salmon, and it's all for the sake of just like being able to buy it in Waitrose and get sort of, you know, cheap, relatively cheap salmon. It's just like, it's so unnecessary and it's so barbaric, and there's a hell of a lot of money being made by a very few people for it. But all these examples of facts tied in with it, like the amount of shit that is coming from these salmon that are in these cages per year is equivalent to 2.5 million people. You know, this is like half the population of Scotland shitting straight into the water, and that it's like an orgeous dropping to all these beautiful lochs and, you know, waterways. And it's this, the SNP, the Scottish government, are completely behind it. It shows that they, just like all the rest of the politicians and governments, they don't really give a shit about the country. They can say, oh, Scotland, that, you know, beautiful country. That, whereas all their route today is to make the money, and they are totally in cahoots with these few. There's one Norwegian billionaire, he owns 90% of them. And this has really rankled me. And so when I got asked by Scotsman Sessions to do a piece, I thought I'm going to go back to one I did a year and a half ago, which looks at this whole thing of aquaculture. And but I thought what I'll do is, at last, I will get the screen that I've got up here in the living room, and I'll get the video projector that my partner Emma bought me that I've no used nearly enough, and I will make an animation on Keynote, the Mac equivalent of PowerPoint, because I knew I could work the animations on that, and I will make an animation and I will perform in front of it, and and that's what I did, and it's up there, and it's barking. It is mad. But it's serious in that way as well, but it's sort of trying to sort of aim at children. And I'm seeing it as a sort of ongoing thing, the same way Year of the Horse and the Bum Clocks and everything. This is something that I'm going to be pursuing. So
can I ask, Tam, just sorry, but in there, that's quite an interesting point there, because there's the subversive element of that. If you think about who the audience is literally as many people as you could possibly want to get this message across, but you're using a kind of medium that is quite kind of subversive in terms of the children element. Was that deliberate, or was that just something that had come through just your thoughts around perhaps moving forward and bringing a new generation of kids along to try and maybe open their eyes up? Because if you think about it, you come from an age through the 80s which activism, trade unionism, the miners' strike, this stuff was quite mainstream, and it was quite, within there. But now I worry that for a lot of young people, especially what we're faced with regards to what's going on right now, whether it's Trumpian politics or whether it's Boris Johnson trying to, rip up legislation, I worry that youngsters perhaps are maybe being blindsided by some of this. And I wonder whether your idea about who an audience could potentially be is it the kind of the core of your work?
Yeah, well, I mean, the biggest way that has happened is that there's a local campaign, it was, and then now it was successful, unbelievably so, that it's called the Children's Wood in North Kelvin Meadow. It's this patch of land that was old sports pitches, like all-weather pitches, that sort of asphalt, and they had the old sort of floodlights and that as well. They were football pitches, but then they just they weren't getting used anymore, and they were getting overgrown, and then trees started to grow on it, and it was dog walkers initially that were local dog walkers were using it and that as well, and then it became like a sort of the community felt, we love this, we like this, having this in the middle of the sort of the tenements. And then they said they were going to build Georgian townhouses, flats on it, and people were going, well, we don't need these flats, and so a campaign got going to try and save this piece of land. And once my daughter's 10 now, and once she was born, then we found ourselves getting asked, saying that one of the key things that they did, was calling it the Children's Wood, was a very good PR idea. And then Julia Donaldson, who, I don't know, some of the guys might know her from, like, the Gruffalo, that as well. She was, a famous children's writer. And she lived up in Bearsden for a long while. And they asked her to support the campaign. And she said, yeah. She said, this is like an outdoor community centre. And so then once she was on board, they then asked me as a sort of local actor, said, would you come and read the Gruffalo? in the wood. And I said, aye, sure. And this was like massively successful because, you know, the kids they loved it. And I think it's still ongoing. But I then I started then doing other ones like at Halloween coming up each year. We'd do Room on the Broom, her one, and I would sort of dress up as a witch in that as well. And then there's one called Stick Man, which fit perfectly. He's a stick. And I got a brown leotard, like a wee bits of green. And it was like suddenly I've moved from, you know, like the Acid House. That was where I think it was because of the Acid House they said, Tam Dean Burn, scariest actor in Scotland. And then suddenly I'm becoming a children's entertainer. And it's like, how did this happen? But it's all sort of fitting in, things fitting in together. And it was sort of, our daughter was reared on being part of this campaign. It was the children that, there was one fantastic day where all the Glasgow councillors came on a visit and I was on the megaphone and like we're doing calling and response, I'm shouting out and all the kids are, and they're hounding all these councillors, got all these bairns around their feet and I'm just completely baffled. And I mean, I thought we've got the River Kelvin right here, we've got the Botanics here, and I thought they're never going to win this campaign. But just like so often, there's that I find myself supporting what could be like lost causes, like communism, that as well. It's like St. Jude, I think it is, the patron saint of lost causes, that I thought we'll never win this, but I didn't recognise what the difference is in a community-led piece of land. You can do things that you can't do in the Botanics or on the Walkway or things like that. And we won this campaign. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. But it then did spur on that we then, with reading Julia Donaldson's stories, another then idea came to me. Was when I saw that she had 186 books, wow, that when the whole thing with the Commonwealth Games coming up, I thought, we will go around Scotland, follow the baton, the Commonwealth, you know, the Queen's baton, I think it was called, but we try and avoid using that term. That around Scotland, trying to read all her stories and sing all her songs, because we had been doing her songs. Andy Alston in the band Delamitri, he got involved with us. My partner Emma plays the flute, and so as a wee unit, we were doing her songs. But that sort of activism, but was involving children, then was part of the spur that towards this aquaculture. But what actually then sparked it for me was then, it was that idea of shit at the bottom of the sea that I said. And it just then sparked that song that the Singing Kettle sang. There's a hole at the bottom of the sea. There's a hole at the bottom of the sea. There's a hole, there's a hole, there's a hole at the bottom of the sea. And so I just changed it to there's shit at the bottom of the sea. And then there's fish at the shit at the bottom of the sea. And it's like the ideas again, then you go, God, that just makes such sense. It just, everything fits in and I can see all the elements of it. And yeah, I think I've realised that so much now that that's who I've got to be trying to reach is that audience. When it comes to it in the Scotsman session, I go in it, I say, I'm not going to waste my time on you. I want to speak to your children. And then I come up with a slide saying, or if you've not got children, I want to speak to the child in you, which is so, or like an Americanism or something like that. But then I start off, speak to the children, but then immediately I start talking about the Norwegian billionaire and about how the Norwegians set up their oil fund. And my partner, Emma, she said, you're supposed to be talking to the kids. I go, yeah, I know that. But it's a work in progress, you know, as with everything in that way as well. But